In the magical world of Alnieth, there is an ongoing war between the mortals with limited lifespans and the immortals with respawn hacks. The outcome of the war depended on the battle between the two strongest men on both sides, Graham the human hero and Veltal, the demon lord ruling over the immortals. A battle like this would normally be a lost cause since Veltal is immortal, but with the holy sword Graham possessed, he was able to deal a blow strong enough that it somehow overcame Veltal's regeneration and led to his demise. Veltal couldn't help but praise the hero for managing to defeat him, but he was still salty about losing to a mortal, so in his final moments he swore that he would return to get his revenge, and with that he vanished from the world. Years later, Veltal awakens once more, and he is greeted by one of his loyal servants, Makina. She kneels before him and says she has patiently waited 500 years for the day that he would return, and she apologizes for having to attend to him in such informal attire, but Veltal says he doesn't mind. He's just glad she managed to perform his reincarnation ritual and bring him back to life, but with that said, he has no clue where they are and wants to begin his conquest of Alnieth once more. However, about that, Makina tells him a lot of stuff happened in the 500 years since his death, and Alnieth, it's gone. Around 80 years ago, Alnieth and Earth were caught in a major catastrophe, which caused the two worlds to fuse with one another. As a result, 90% of the population was wiped out and national governments ceased to function. So cities began to operate as independent states, and a few wars have broken out since then, but things are relatively peaceful now. That's the present state of the world, and given that Earth possessed incredibly advanced technology and Alnieth possessed Magitech, the fusion of the two worlds led to a lot of rapid advancement. Makina leads him to the surface to show him what the new world looks like, and Veltal is astounded by how far the world has come, but in his astonishment, he forgets to pay attention to his surroundings, so he nearly bumps into a random guy in the street, and Makina has to push him out of the way. He apologizes to her for letting himself get distracted, but he can't believe that man so carelessly bumped into her, one of the 6 dark peers. It's almost as if they don't know or care who she is, so Veltal is prepared to instill a new sense of fear into these foolish mortals. He raises his hand to the sky, and Makina already knows what he's about to do, so she tries to tell him it's not a good idea, but it's already too late as he has already fired his spell into the sky and created a massive hole in the cloud cover. In an anticlimactic turn of events, the people seem more annoyed than scared by the fact that someone was dumb enough to use magic in the city, and an alarm goes off soon after, so Makina explains that it is forbidden to use grand magic within the city, so they have to get out of here before they get in trouble. Veltal doesn't understand why he has to do something as cowardly as running away, but since Makina insists, he goes along with her. However, as they are leaving, Veltal notices someone who looks a lot like the hero Graham. He has no time to confront the man as Makina continues to drag him away. Once they are out of danger, Makina sits down with Veltal and informs him that after he died, the immortals had to sign a ceasefire with the mortals and the war between them ended. But when the worlds fused 80 years ago, the citizens of the immortal kingdom were forced to scatter all across the world, and not long after, the major industries began a crusade against them. Veltal asks what she means, so Makina tells him that the people of the world collectively decided that immortals didn't deserve human rights, so they began relentlessly hunting them. At first it wasn't that bad, but then people developed anti-immortal weaponry, and from that point on, immortals were killed on sight to the point of near extinction. It takes a few moments for Veltal to process that his people have been wiped out, but once he comes to terms with it, he asks Makina if she knows what happened to the other 5 dark peers. The whereabouts of May, Sowold, and Ralshin are all unknown, but sadly, Zinol is confirmed to be dead. He sacrificed himself and acted as a decoy so Makina can escape from the hunters, and he said he was doing it for the sake of Veltal, because aside from Ralshin, Makina was the only other person capable of performing Veltal's reincarnation ritual. Zinol had always been a loyal follower of Veltal, so he is grateful to have had such a good subordinate, but there's still one more person Makina hasn't mentioned, so Veltal asks her about Marcus. Makina doesn't really want to talk about Marcus, so tries to change the subject and asks Veltal if he's thirsty. Veltal says he isn't though, so Makina has to make up an excuse as to why he needs to drink something and tells him to wait there while she goes to buy one. While she's gone, a VTuber starts streaming on some billboards, and he's wondering what the hell it's supposed to be, but then he notices several lights flowing around the area, and it seems to be caused by this one girl on a roof near the billboards. It's not clear what she's doing at first, but then she flicks her wrist, and in an instant, all the billboards start playing hub videos. The girl seems pretty pleased with herself, and no one knows she's the one who did it, so she starts walking away. But as she is leaving, Veltal calls out to her and she panics a little because she just got caught. She tries pretending that she's not involved in any way, but Veltal clearly saw her do something with the surrounding ether, and then all of a sudden, the screens changed. She can't believe someone was perceptive enough to figure out what she did based on the surrounding ether alone. So she asks Veltal who he is, although she doesn't take him seriously when he says he's the Demon Lord. Veltal explains that he knows she did something to the giant picture screens, but he doesn't understand the principle behind it, so he would love to learn about it from an expert like her. The girl is flattered that he thinks she's an expert on the subject, so she starts talking about how this was just some basic hacking, and by comparison, leaking the Pokemon files was way harder. All she did just now was take advantage of a fatal flaw in the billboard's logic barrier, and then she just slipped in some spicy videos for fun. Veltal interrupts her speech and tells her she is looking for one of his subordinates named Marcus, and he's wondering if she has any idea where he can find him. The girl points to the massive tower in the middle of the city and says the CEO of that company is named Marcus, so he might be able to find him if he goes there. Veltal follows her advice and heads up to the heavy magic industries in search of Marcus. As he enters, he spots this weird-looking thing waving at him, but he ignores it and heads to the front desk and tells the receptionist that he is here looking for Marcus. But before he's even done speaking, Marcus's private secretary comes down and says she is here to bring Veltal to Marcus. They both get on an elevator headed to the top of the tower, and while they go up, Veltal notices that the secretary has a pin of that thing he saw when he came in, so he asks what that is about. She proudly exclaims that this is the mascot of the company, and they plan to create a brand around it in the near future. Eventually, Veltal arrives at the top of the tower, where he finds Marcus sitting atop his throne. Marcus says it has been a long time since he last saw Veltal, but Veltal finds it disrespectful that Marcus is remaining seated while in the presence of his king. Marcus ignores him and asks what business he has here, so Veltal says he wants Marcus to help him rebuild the Immortal Kingdom. Marcus laughs in his face for a solid minute before telling him that he won't be doing that in a mocking tone. Veltal feels insulted, so he prepares to teach Marcus a painful lesson in respect. However, before he can cast his spell, Marcus's assistant strikes at him with a blade, so he is forced to dodge out of the way. He is shocked that she is capable of using armament forging magic, but before she attacks again, Marcus tells her to stand down. He then turns to Veltal and tells him he has become weak because in his prime, he would never have felt threatened by magic of that scale. How exactly doesn't he intend to take over the world if a single human is able to give him so much trouble? Marcus refuses to serve a king who is so pitiful, so he tells Veltal to get out of his sight before he forces him. Veltal is enraged and begins casting a spell to take Marcus down, but before he can finish, Marcus has already cast his spell Breaker, and Veltal is left in shock because Marcus was never gifted enough to outclass him in spell casting. Marcus has been waiting for this moment for years, so he takes great pleasure in telling Veltal that his strength is a relic of the past. He reveals the implant in the back of his neck, but Veltal doesn't know what that thing is, so Marcus pulls up an instructional video explaining everything about it. The device is called a Familia, and while using magic normally requires a 5-step process: initialization, construction, expansion, incantation, and proclamation. This device allows people to skip 3 steps, so now anyone, and I mean anyone, can use magic at high levels. And in case Veltal is getting any ideas about implanting a Familia of his own, Marcus specifically designed it to be incompatible with higher beings like Veltal. That means he can never use a Familia, and while his natural spellcasting speed is superhuman compared to AI spellcasting, he might as well be sending his spells by mail. Veltal asks why Marcus is doing all of this, so Marcus reveals that he had never liked Veltal from the very day they met. He was tyrannical, arrogant, and worst of all, he had the skills to warrant his arrogance, so Marcus could never oppose him back then, but that all changes now. He tells Veltal that it's about time for him to leave, so he begins launching several blood swords at him, and Veltal isn't able to dodge all of them, so he ends up getting stabbed several times and launched out of the window. Marcus has always wanted to do that, and now that he has finally triumphed over Veltal, he declares that he is the new Demon Lord. But all that aside, his secretary really wants to discuss the promotional ideas she has for the company mascot, so Marcus tells her to submit her ideas at the next planning meeting. Meanwhile, Veltal has crash-landed back into the city, and his regeneration is far slower than it used to be, so he's having a hard time recovering from his injury. He tries to walk out into the street, but he accidentally bumps into someone, and as a result, he gets into a fight that he immediately loses. Now look at him laid out in a pile of trash, and wondering why he keeps losing to mortals like he lost to Graham until Machina eventually finds him. Machina gets him onto a train and begins apologizing for hesitating to inform him of Marcus's betrayal, and because of her hesitation, he ended up being disgraced so badly. He tells her there's no need to apologize because even if she had told him, he would have still wanted to confirm it for himself. Once the train comes to a stop, Machina leads Veltol to the apartment building she lives in and tells him this is her home. Veltol thinks she means the entire building belongs to her, but Machina leads him into her small room and explains that this is where she really lives. Veltol thinks she is joking at first, but Machina is dead serious because this is all she can afford with her salary. Veltol realizes she has been living like this all this time while waiting for his return, so he pulls her close and thanks her because he will never forget the loyalty she has shown him. Centuries ago, Machina was being persecuted by the people of her time because after they found out that she was immortal, they naturally blamed her for all their problems and decided that the best course of action would be to throw her into a volcano. However, before Machina could hit the lava, Veltol appeared out of nowhere to save her. This was their first time meeting, and the only reason Veltol came was because he heard there was another immortal like him in the area, and after seeing Machina for the first time, he was not disappointed. He extended an offer to her to devote her body and soul to him. And from that day forward, Machina has remained loyal to Veltol. She soon wakes up to her alarm, and before Veltol wakes up, she heads to the kitchen to make breakfast. While waiting for the soup to boil, she calls on her virtual assistant, Eliclate, and a miniature version of herself appears in her field of view. It gives her a breakdown of the date, time, and current weather conditions. Machina asks Elec how she's doing, so Elec runs a full diagnostic check on her systems and reports that everything is in perfect working order, which is good, but that's now exactly what Machina was asking. Machina finishes up with breakfast, and once she is done, she goes to wake Veltol up and serves him the food. He's never seen food like this before, but just by its smell, he can tell that it is going to taste great. He picks up the chopsticks to try it, and sure enough, he loves the food Machina made for him, and hearing that makes her extremely happy. Once he is done eating, Veltol asks if Machina knows of the location of any other immortals, and she does know of a few other immortals who managed to escape the immortal hunts. But recently, immortals have been going missing, and Machina has even lost contact with two of her close aides, Ornard and Palmlock. She hopes they just went into hiding, but with no way of contacting them, she can't be sure. Veltol asks if immortal hunts still happen, but she answers that the hunts actually ended decades ago. The hunts were started by Marcus to secure his position at the top, and now that he has all the power, he has no reason to continue. The resentment people had towards immortals has also dwindled over the years, so it's not particularly dangerous to be seen outside. After Machina's aides went missing, she went to their apartment to check up on them, and the place was a mess, so she assumes a fight happened. But the only clue she could find was this note with the words Immortal Furnace written on it. As Veltol reads the message, he reaches for his cup of tea, but sudden sharp pain causes him to flinch, so he spills it everywhere. It seems that he still hasn't fully healed from the injuries he sustained yesterday, and it's not just his regeneration that got weaker, everything about him is weaker than he used to be. Even that spell he cast her when he first arrived would have had a much greater effect if Veltol were at full power, and Machina attributes this to the fact that the faith Veltol used as power during his prime no longer exists. As of now, he is only spoken of in history books. Without recognition, Veltol's powers will never truly return to him, but he thinks that should be easy enough to solve as he just has to make himself known once more. With that said, he tells Machina that he wants to head out and explore the surrounding area since sitting around all day would be bad for him. So Machina suggests that the two of them should go shopping. Out in the city, the first thing they should do is get Veltol a set of good street clothes, so they walk into a store and Machina asks him to step on the platform so the machine can take a 3D scan of his body. She apologizes for being limited to cheap store clothes due to her budget, but Veltol tells her he doesn't mind since his natural beauty would look good in any attire. After taking his measurements, she asks if Veltol has any preferences, but he doesn't know much about the style of the current era, so he leaves the choice up to Machina. Machina decides to ask Elec to make the most optimal choice for Veltol, taking into account budget and practicality, so after a bit of processing, Elec settles on a tracksuit. Machina doesn't think a tracksuit would be a good idea, but once Veltol sees it, he absolutely loves the way it looks, and he is even more intrigued by the design on the back. So Machina explains it's an old language used by the people who used to live on this land, and the symbols on the jacket spell out Demon Lord. Since Veltol seems to like it, she takes the tracksuit for him and walks out of the store. But before she leaves, he gets her attention because they haven't paid for it yet. However, Machina explains that all transactions are performed automatically. After that, they have some food at a fast food joint, and while they are sitting together, Veltol asks Machina what it's like to have a familia installed. Marcus's betrayal aside, the Familia is without a doubt a revolutionary device, so he is curious about it. Makina explains that it is really convenient since it not only allows for easier use of magic, but it can also be used to gather information, go shopping, or even communicate. Before Familias were mainstream, people had smartphones to do these things, but it was really inconvenient to have to hold it. Veltal asks her to let him see it, so he turns her around and begins touching it. Makina is a little startled at first, but she's actually really enjoying this, so much so that her Familia has to warn her that her heart rate just spiked. Once he is done inspecting it, Veltal asks her if it isn't uncomfortable having the Familia installed in the nape of her neck. And while it felt strange at first, she got used to it once it became illegal for companies to stream ads straight into people's heads. It's difficult to live daily life without one of these, but at the same time, having a Familia doesn't necessarily make your life better, as shown by her current living situation. As they walk home, Veltal makes a declaration that he will get a job. Makina is taken aback and tells Veltal that he doesn't need to do something as lowly as working. Her living conditions may be suboptimal right now, but she assures him that she will provide a better lifestyle for him. She says she will just pick up more shifts or maybe even get 2 or 3 more jobs. But Veltal interrupts her and says that times have changed. He is no longer the omnipotent god he once was, so he needs to adapt to the current circumstances. And most importantly, he wouldn't feel right if he just sat back and did nothing while Makina worked to provide him with food, clothing, and shelter. Without his duties as king to occupy him, he will need to take up labor, but that does not mean he has given up on conquering the world, so he asks Makina if she is willing to continue to serve him, and Makina swears to be by his side for the rest of her life. Later that day, Veltal is about to head out to look for a job, but Makina refuses to let him go without her because she's worried about him. Veltal tells her she can't come since she has her own job to worry about, but Makina says she can just call off for the day so she can go with him. Veltal refuses to let her do that, so he reminds her that in the unlikely event that he fails to find a job, he would have to rely on her income, so she can't just skip out on her job. Makina agrees to let him go on his own, but for safety, she hands Veltal a device that comes with a little money in case of emergencies. It also has a tracker, so if there's any trouble, Veltal can use this to contact her, and she will race over as soon as possible. He realizes that she is worried about him, but the extent she is going to just makes him feel like a child. Still, even though he said he wanted to go by himself, he doesn't have a clue what kinds of jobs are available or how to get one. He's also starting to get hungry, so he can't afford to be picky about it, unless he wants to end up begging on the street. He gets up and yells out that he has no money and is looking for a job, but as he is yelling, one guy comes up to him and tells him to stop. He says if Veltal wants work, he should go to the commercial guild with his citizen ID, but Veltal has never heard of a citizen ID, so the guy assumes he must be an immigrant. Since it's clear that Veltal doesn't know anything about the city, the man informs him that this is his turf, so Veltal can't be doing stuff like this out here. Veltal hadn't realized he was encroaching on someone else's territory, so he apologizes and turns to leave, but before he does, the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild so he can apply for a job there. It won't guarantee that he gets anything, but it's better than having nothing. Also, he warns Veltal not to get involved with any companies under the IHMI company, especially construction-related, because they are incredibly exploitative and laugh in the face of safety regulations. Veltal takes the man's advice and thanks him for the help, so he heads to the commercial guild in search of employment. However, once he gets there, the interviewer isn't too enthusiastic about employing him. On his application, Veltal wrote down wide-scale annihilation magic as one of his special skills, and he also wrote down dungeon creation and experience leading a nation 500 years ago. So the interviewer calmly puts down his application and tells Veltal that there are no positions available for him. Besides, since Veltal doesn't have a familia, he isn't eligible for hire anyway. After Veltal returns home, he is feeling really depressed about not getting a job, so he lays on Makina's lap and asks her if he is really incapable of doing anything in this world, but she assures him that he is still superior to everyone else, so she tells him he should just let her do the working from now on. However, Veltal refuses to sit idle, so he asks Makina if there is anyone she can contact for assistance, and now that she thinks about it, there is someone she can call. Veltal is surprised that Makina actually has a friend in this era, but Makina wouldn't exactly call the person a friend. They do go shopping together, eat, play, and sleep over sometimes, but that's about it. Veltal is confused because they sound exactly like a friend to him, but Makina still refuses to acknowledge it. A little while later, they meet Makina's friend in a nearby cafe, and it turns out to be a hacker girl Veltal had met yesterday. She introduces herself properly to Veltal and says her name is Takahashi, but even though Makina had mentioned how the Great Demon Lord would one day be revived, she never actually thought she would be able to meet him in the flesh. She starts poking Veltal to make sure he is real, and Makina yells at her not to be disrespectful, but Veltel says it's fine since he is the one asking her for assistance here. Veltel asks how Takahashi and Makina met, so Takahashi starts explaining that she met Makina on a doujin site, but after seeing the look on Makina's face, she realizes that she probably shouldn't tell Veltel about Makina's search history, so she tells him to forget about it. Just then, Veltel notices the familia on Takahashi's neck, so he reaches over to inspect it, which freaks Takahashi out. But she lets him finish what he's doing. Veltel apologizes for startling her, but he noticed that Takahashi's familia was different from Makina's, so he was looking into how it is built and how it functions. Takahashi is surprised that Veltel can do all that just by touching it. So Makina explains that Veltel has a Sage Eye ability that allows him to use the flow of mana to understand the composition of any object he touches. He has a general idea of how a familia works, but there are still a lot of components he can't fully analyze yet. However, that's a problem for another day because the reason they are here right now is to ask if Takahashi can introduce Veltel to some kind of work. She asks why Veltel doesn't just go to the commercial guild, but he already tried that, and they rejected him for not having a familia. And due to a certain CDO's vendetta against him, Veltel can't have a familia installed, so they were hoping Takahashi would have some ideas. Takahashi thinks about it for a second, and Veltel is a young-looking, 500-year-old demon lord with a great voice, a handsome face, and no familia. Yeah, there's only one clear option available, so it has been decided that Veltel will become a streamer. Takahashi explained that streamers post videos of themselves doing stuff online, for which they receive money from ad revenue or donations. She even has some leftover equipment from when she used to stream, although it will be a little outdated. But if he becomes popular, he can just buy new equipment for himself. Makina says she is firmly against the idea of Veltel becoming a streamer because the job is extremely unstable and risky. She thinks it would be much better if he got a reliable job like flipping burgers, but Takahashi thinks this could be a great opportunity for him. Veltel has a great voice, great looks, and an incredible aura, so he fits all the markers for becoming a star, and when she puts it like that, Makina can't deny that Veltel is charming, but she still isn't sure this is a good idea. There are some games he wouldn't be able to play without a familia, but he could always just stick to the games that still use physical controls. And most people don't even watch because of the game anymore, they'd just be watching to see Veltel do stuff. Makina asks him what he thinks about all this, and given the fact that he doesn't have many options available to him, he agrees to go along with Takahashi's idea. Later that day, Makina was taking a bath while Veltel did some research about this world's internet, and it doesn't take him long to figure out how it works. It allows people to spread information faster than anything he has ever seen, but as a result of all this access, people either resort to watching cat videos or doing degenerate shit online. He believes it should be easy enough for him to sway public opinion in his favor with this, but all of a sudden, Makina finishes her bath and walks out completely naked. Once she realizes what just happened, she gets dressed and apologizes to Veltel for being so inconsiderate. She has lived alone for so long that it became a habit, but Veltel tells her that there's nothing to be sorry about because he actually thought her body was quite beautiful, although he still thinks his own body is better. A couple hours later, Takahashi arrived at Makina's house with all her old equipment so she can help Veltel set it up. And once it's done, she hands him the controller so he can try out some games. She tries explaining the controls to him, but Veltel tells her there's no need since he already knows exactly how it works. Something like this is much easier to analyze than a familia, so he starts scrolling through the game library and settles on Bloodborne. Takahashi remembers how so many people rage quit because the game was too difficult, but she's sure Veltel's analysis skills will make this easy for him. However, as Veltel starts up the game, he couldn't even make it past the intro. This is a lot harder than he thought it would be, and even after a few hours of gameplay, he still hasn't made much progress, so Takahashi tells him straight up that he sucks at it. Makina thinks Takahashi is being rude, but Veltel is well aware that he sucks at this. He understands the mechanics, he just can't seem to master it, so Makina is a little worried that he won't be able to stream after all. On the contrary, Takahashi thinks this will actually work out great for Veltel's online image, because the only thing the internet loves more than a hot guy is a hot guy who fails confidently. But before that, Takahashi says they need to work on Veltel's introductory greeting. Veltel asks if he can just introduce himself normally, but Takahashi tells him that that's not an option. There are already over 5 million streamers in the world, and barely 1% of those streamers actually make enough money to survive, so if Veltel wants to get into the business, he has to think of a way to leave an impression on as many people as possible with his greeting. Takahashi seems to think the greeting is a really big deal, so Veltel asks Makina if she has any ideas on what he could use as a greeting. Makina thinks about it for a second, and she thinks it would be best if he just adapted one of his warning declarations and used that. Veltal gives it a try, and the declaration is basically him telling the foolish mortals that they should be honored to be in his presence, and it's dramatic, so Takahashi thinks it's a good start, but it still isn't very attention-grabbing, so they will have to think of something to add to it. In the meantime, Takahashi says she will give Veltal a crash course on everything he needs to know about streaming. Basically, he's going to need to stream every day, even if no one is watching, and no matter what he does, he has to avoid talking about any erotic or racist stuff, because that'll get him banned quicker than Asmongold. Most important of all, while Veltal is streaming, Makina has to make sure she never gets caught on camera, because they can't have people thinking she's his girlfriend. As a friendly gesture, Takahashi asks one of her friends to help promote his stream, but he owes her a favor after this. Time goes on, and Veltal starts becoming more and more popular, but when the trolls inevitably invade his stream, he is absolutely unfazed and even encourages them to keep roasting him. It doesn't matter to him since he gains power from having others think about him, so even negative publicity works out in his favor. Before long, through hard work and determination, Veltal reaches 1 million views, and for his latest stream, he will be playing Bloodborne 3 non-stop until he clears it. However, while he does this, there's a camera being pointed at Makina's house, and it captures the moment Makina gets home from work. As Makina enters, Veltal has just successfully cleared the game, so he is celebrating his victory, and many of his fans congratulate him on it. He had improved a lot after finishing the first and second Bloodborne games, but this was still insanely difficult to beat, and he's glad he got through it. He thanks all his fans and haters for sticking with him until he was done, but with that said, he has to end the stream for today. Once he is done, Veltal breathes a sigh of relief, and Makina opens the door to check if he needs anything. Veltal says he's fine and he's going to head out because he has a package he wants to pick up. Makina offers to go pick up his package for him instead, but Veltal has been looking for an excuse to move around for a while, so Makina says she will have dinner ready for him by the time he gets back. He heads out into the city, and as he walks through the slums, he talks about how distorted and trained the social structures are in this city. However, as he continues to walk, he is shocked to come across a familiar face sitting on the side of the road. The hero Graham. Back in the day, Graham was a kind brother and was taking care of his little sister, Melina, who had fallen ill. He comforted her and said he would head out to gather some medicinal herbs to help her recover, but as he was about to leave, his father called out to him and handed him a sword. He had heard that there were monsters active in the forest, so he wants Graham to take the sword so he can protect himself if he runs into anything dangerous. His mother is also worried about his safety, so she says a small prayer for him before he leaves, and Graham thanks both of them for their consideration. He went out into the forest that day, and the herb gathering went smoothly, but as he was returning home, he ran into an army of lizardmen under the leadership of Zanol, one of Veltal's generals. Since he was hidden, he didn't have to fight them, but he wondered what they could possibly be doing in such a remote location. To his horror, when he returned home, he discovered that his home, along with his entire family, had been burnt to the ground. And from that day forward, he swore that he would get his revenge on Veltal. But right now, he has a dazed look in his eyes, and he is seated next to his sworn enemy. Veltal begins talking about this udon shop and assures Graham that this is one of the best joints around, but Graham doesn't have much to say about that. Veltal tries to keep the conversation going and says that the food of this world is far better than it was back in his day, and Graham agrees, but he still doesn't have much to say. The food finally arrives and they are both about to eat, but Graham finally says something and talks about how strange it feels to be slurping noodles while seated next to the enemy who killed his family and friends. Veltal feels the same way since Graham single-handedly killed several of Veltal's vassals, but right now, he bears no hatred towards Graham at all. He's just curious to know how Graham managed to survive this long when he's immortal. The only explanation would be if Graham somehow became immortal, but that would go against his entire ideology of making the most out of a limited lifespan. Graham explains that he didn't give up his mortality. Rather, as a reward for defeating Veltal, the goddess Meldia gifted him with the blessing of eternal youth, and while that blessing has allowed him to live this long, it doesn't make him immortal. Veltal comments that goddess Meldia must have been quite fond of him, so you can imagine her granting him such a blessing. After Graham ended the war with the Immortals, Immortals began starting wars among themselves again, so he was ordered to go out to the battlefield and slay the same mortals he had once fought to save. And even after the Civil War had ended, the people turned their hatred towards Graham for some reason. Veltal believes an outcome like that was inevitable since people naturally fear individuals with great power. Graham was exiled from the kingdom, so he was forced to wander for centuries until Fantasia happened and the worlds became fused. Since then, he has killed so many mortals and immortals that he believes there is no place for him left in this world as a hero. He asks Veltal why he sought to rule the world in the first place, so Veltal answers that he was trying to achieve world peace. There are several ways one can become an immortal, like phoenixes, curses, or blessings, so aside from a few rare exceptions, all immortals used to be mortal at some point. Still, mortals constantly ostracized and persecuted immortals because they were different, and the immortals were no better because they did the exact same thing to the mortals. The lesson Veltal took from this was that no matter what you are, people will always hate and fear that which is different. So he believed that the only way to bring about world peace was to stand at the top of the world and rule it to make sure no one had to suffer such persecution. Graham doesn't believe peace through world domination would work, but he also can't deny that people left on their own will never achieve peace because he has experienced the senseless persecution and wars firsthand. Even so, he still refuses to admit that Veltal is right, so Veltal accepts that Graham will never agree with him. Graham gets up to leave and thanks Veltal for the noodles, but before he goes, he tells Veltal that he is glad he got the chance to speak with him. Veltal gets up to leave as well, and while walking down the street, he notices Takahashi down in an alley, and she seems to be in some kind of trouble. She apparently hired this ogre for a job, but now he is trying to extort twice the pay from her. Takahashi tells him he's stupid if he thinks she's going to give him that much money, but the ogre is totally prepared to beat her up if he doesn't get what he wants, so he raises his hand and is about to punch her. However, Veltal grabs his arm and tells him to leave Takahashi alone. He is feeling generous today, so he is willing to overlook the ogre's disrespect, but the ogre recognizes Veltal as the guy he beat up a while ago, so he isn't scared of him. He says he's going to kill Veltal this time, so Takahashi tries telling Veltal to run before he gets hurt, but Veltal says it's fine since he has been meaning to test out how much power he has regained from his 1 million subscribers. As the ogre tries to punch him, Veltal stretches out his hand and catches the punch, but then the ogre activates wind magic and completely shatters Veltal's arm. However, with his powers partially restored, Veltal is able to regenerate his arm instantly and flicks the ogre into a pile of trash. The guy's out cold and Veltal is honestly disappointed since he was expecting more of a fight. Takahashi comes up to him and asks if he is alright, and Veltal says he is perfectly fine, but he wants to know who that guy was and why he was attacking her. Takahashi explains that he was supposed to be her bodyguard for a big job today, but all of a sudden, he started making ridiculous demands. He didn't know the guy was supposed to be her bodyguard, so he apologizes for knocking him out, but Takahashi says it's alright since she just found someone even better. She asks Veltal to become her bodyguard for the day, and she even offers to pay him for it too. So since he owes her a favor, Veltal agrees. Takahashi leads him to the location and tells him that she is trying to steal something from this warehouse, so she needs him to create a distraction while she gets it. Veltal says he understands the objective, but before Takahashi can give him any more instructions, he gets up and despite Takahashi trying to stop him, he has already kicked down the door to a major Yakuza operation. Veltal doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing here, so he asks Takahashi over the comms if the cube in the table is the target. Takahashi tells him it is, but she's also confused as to how he's communicating with her since he doesn't have a familia. Veltal proudly states that he just copied the communication ether that the familia produces so it can reproduce the feature of magic. Anyway, since there aren't that many enemies here, Veltal says he will subdue them and claim the cube for Takahashi, but before he does anything, she asks him to make sure he doesn't kill anyone. Veltal agrees to hold back, so before the fight begins, he announces himself using his stream greeting. However, none of the Yakuza members have seen his stream, so it just makes things really awkward. If there are still people who don't recognize him, Veltal is going to have to work a lot harder to make his name known. But for now, his 1 million subscribers worth of power should be more than enough to take these guys down. The Yakuza are still confused about what's going on, but they assume Veltal must just be some crazy guy, so one of them pulls out a magic gun and fires it at him. However, Veltal isn't fazed by this and uses strengthening magic on himself so he can deflect the bullets. Once the Yakuza member runs out of ammo, Veltal goes on the offensive and begins knocking the Yakuza members out one after the other with minimal effort. The Yakuza member with a magic gun switches to a regular gun since it's faster than reloading, but just before he shoots, Takahashi takes control of his vision and displays an illusion that tricks the Yakuza member into shooting his partner. Veltal then knocks the last guy out, and with all of them unconscious, the mission is practically over. Veltal goes over to one of the Yakuza members and begins inspecting their gun, which uses some kind of card as ammunition. Takahashi is impressed with how easily Veltal took out those Yakuza, but they should really grab the box and get out of here before they get themselves into more trouble than they accounted for. She says she is on her way to meet up with Veltal, but he tells her to stay where she is because it looks like trouble just arrived. Whatever it is, it begins attacking Veltal, all it's covered with some sort of invisibility cloak, so to even the playing field, Veltal uses the magic gun to blast the cloak off, revealing a giant mech suit. Takahashi recognizes this as 4th generation Magino gear, and it couldn't possibly belong to the Yakuza because these things are far too expensive for them to own. This is the first time Veltal has ever seen something like this before, and he is eager to test his strength against it, so he begins by firing the magic gun at it. Predictably, the magic gun does absolutely nothing against the giant mech, but the assailant decides to follow Veltal's lead and pulls out a magic gun of his own. But his is a lot more powerful. He tries to shoot Veltal, but Veltal is too quick for him and manages to sneak into a blind spot above the mech. By the time the assailant finally locates and locks onto him, Veltal is already in position and fires a powerful blast of his straight at the mech. At full power, he could have easily one-shot the mech, but while Veltal's blast was certainly strong at his current power level, he knows it was nowhere near strong enough to defeat a foe like the mech. Although that doesn't mean he can't win this fight, because if blasts don't work, he will just have to go for close combat, so he summons a sword. The mech matches Veltal and converts its gun into a sword, so the two charge at each other and clash in a magnificent display of strength and animation budget. Veltal is having a lot of fun with this fight. As things drag on, the mech gets serious, and before Veltal even realizes what's going on, his arm gets chopped off and he gets beheaded. With Veltal seemingly dead, the guy in the mech begins to report that his target has been eliminated. But then the guy freaks out because Veltal's decapitated head starts talking to him. Veltal praises him for being skilled enough to behead the Demon Lord, but he still lacks the combat experience to know that you always double-tap your enemy to make sure they are dead. In any case, Veltal believes the guy deserves a reward for fighting so well, so Veltal says he will allow the mech pilot the honor of witnessing the strongest weapon within his arsenal. A terrifying aura is emanated as Veltal summons the Great Sword, Vernal, and the mech pilot is so stunned that he can barely move. He has never fought anyone who possessed such strength, and he is completely defenseless as Veltal cuts his limbs off one by one until he falls to the ground with only one leg left. Veltal made sure to avoid hitting any vital organs, so the guy inside there should still be alive, and he plans to interrogate him, but before he does, the guy in the mech sends one final report back to HQ, saying he failed to eliminate the target and failed to retrieve the objective, so he will now be executing code 8090. And if you're wondering what 8090 means, let's just say there was a gun installed in the helmet of the suit to make sure the pilot can't be interrogated. After that's over, Takahashi comes out of her hiding spot and she's glad Veltal is alright, but it was really freaky to see him get his head chopped off. Although Veltal doesn't seem to think it was a big deal. He's more surprised that weaponry exists that could enhance an individual's power to such an extent, so he says this time period is truly terrifying. However, Takahashi thinks Veltal is the terrifying one because he just single-handedly destroyed a Magino gear, and these things are strong enough to wipe out entire countries if needed. This also happens to be one made by Marcus's company, and Takahashi knows the Yakuza would never be able to get their hands on one of the suits, so she's starting to worry that this mission might be more trouble than she bargained for. That aside, Veltal is still curious why they went through so much effort just to acquire a cube, so Takahashi explains to him that the cube is actually a storage device, and what her client is after is the information inside the cube. Takahashi says they can take a look at data if Veltal wants, so she pulls out a cube reader and places the cube on it. At first, the only thing that appears is a blank page, but after a little tweaking from Takahashi, the cube opens up and a list of names appears on the list. Takahashi has no idea what to make of this list of names, but Veltal recognizes the people on this list to be his immortal subjects. This is concerning, so Takahashi says she will contact her client so she can find out what the list is about, but unfortunately, her client isn't answering his phone. So they are going to have to go meet him in person if they want to discuss this. Takahashi leads Veltal to the massive apartment building where her client is and says the guy they are looking for is up on the 13th floor. As they walk up to the front door, Takahashi uses her hacking skills to bypass the security system so they are allowed entry even though they aren't residents here, and she is really proud of herself for it too since there's no security system out there that she can't bypass. As Veltal and Takahashi get in the elevator, Takahashi is about to push the elevator button, but Veltal stops her and says he wants to do it instead. Takahashi doesn't mind letting him push the button, but she asks why he wants to do it, and Veltal doesn't really have a reason for it. He just likes pushing buttons. He begins pushing the button for the 13th floor, but Takahashi forgot to mention that this elevator doesn't allow you to get to the 13th floor directly. First, you'd have to go to the second floor, then the 17th, then back to the 4th, and so on until you eventually get to the 13th floor. Since they are here, Veltal starts walking out of the elevator, but Takahashi tells him to wait since her client Eiju is a pretty paranoid guy, so he had dozens of traps laid across the entire floor, and if Veltal accidentally sets one of the traps off, he's going to become minced meat. Veltal appreciates the warning, but as far as he can tell, there are no traps in this room. Although, it would be more accurate to say that all the physical and magical traps have been disarmed. Takahashi is surprised that Veltal could figure that out so easily, but part of his duties as Demon Lord included building and maintaining dungeons, so discerning the layout of traps is a trivial matter for him. They continue walking until they finally get to Eiju's front door and Takahashi rings the bell, but surprisingly, he doesn't answer. Takahashi can understand him ignoring phone calls, but he usually always answers his front door. However, upon closer inspection, Veltal realizes that the door isn't even locked in the first place. This raises a red flag for Takahashi since Eiju would never do something as careless as leave his front door unlocked. Veltal suggests they should proceed with caution since they don't know what they will find in there, so Takahashi leads the way and heads towards Eiju's workroom. There she finds Eiju in his chair, but when she gets a little closer to him, she discovers that he is drenched in blood and completely lifeless. Takahashi freaks out at first, but Veltal calms her down and goes over to inspect the body. He remembers seeing this guy's face somewhere before, although he was wearing a bunch of trash at the time. Takahashi says that sounds like something Eiju would do since he would often dress as a hobo whenever he went out to gather information. There's an obvious stab wound in Eiju's chest and another one in his neck, but judging from the state of the blood around him, Veltal assumes it has only been a few days since Eiju was killed. A man like Eiju may have had many enemies, but the way he was murdered was too efficient for it to have been done out of hatred. It is way more likely that a hitman was hired to take Eiju out, especially since the killer went through the effort of destroying Eiju's familia. Someone must be trying to cover up whatever information Eiju had. It probably had something to do with the job Takahashi accepted from him, but it's not like they can get any information from him now that he's dead. Takahashi thinks for a second and begins searching around Eiju's room, because a seasoned information broker/hacker would definitely hide some sort of offline storage devices nearby for extra data security. After searching for a bit, she discovers a laptop in a hidden desk drawer, and this looks like it might have the answers they are looking for, but when she turns it on, she finds all the files in a corrupted mess. It may look that way, but Veltal notices that the files are all arranged in a very specific order, so Takahashi is able to compile until she uncovers a video. Eiju made this video in case he was killed before he could complete his investigation, and he didn't know who would end up watching it. But he wanted to make sure at least one person knew the truth because the prosperity of this city was built upon terrifying evil. All the power in this city relies on the Aether reactor in the center of the city, but with the enormous scale of the city, the reactor would need at least 10 mana ley lines to draw power from in order to meet the energy demands. However, there are only 2 ley lines in this area, yet the reactor never seems to run out of energy, so it stands to reason that the reactor is drawing power from another source. And this secondary power source is called the Immortal Furnace Project. Essentially, the furnace burns the souls of immortals like firewood and converts the resulting energy into Aether for the city. And since immortals are higher beings, a single immortal's soul produces a lot of energy, way more than the souls of thousands of mortals would ever be able to generate. The data Eiju found showed that Marcus's company employed desperate homeless people as construction workers for the Immortal Furnace, but once construction was done, all the workers suddenly disappeared, and Eiju believes they were all killed so they could be fed to the furnace as well. One of the first immortals to be fed to the furnace was one of Veltal's close subordinates, Zenol, and this greatly angers Veltal. The whole immortal hunt was a scheme by Marcus to turn the world against immortals so people would accept their execution, and he could burn immortal souls in the furnace, although the public was never made aware that this was how he killed them. Recently, Marcus made a deal to buy information about some immortals from the Yakuza, and that probably means he's running low on immortal souls to burn, so he's looking for new victims. If the furnace runs out of immortal fuel, then the heart of the city would cease to exist as people know it. But even so, Eiju thinks it's wrong that innocent immortals are being sacrificed to power the city. After the video ends, Takahashi is enraged by the revelation that immortals are being treated so badly, but there's not much she can do about it since even if she were to try and publicize this information, it is likely she would just end up dead just like Eiju over here. Veltal tells her that this is a problem for immortals, and as the king of immortals, it is his duty to do something about it, so she doesn't need to burden herself with this. For now, they decide to inform city officials of Aju's death so he can receive a proper burial. And as they leave, Veltal tries to contact Makina so he can inform her of the immortal furnace. But to his horror, she isn't responding to his calls. Something must have happened to her. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.